Hello everyone, welcome to my video. Today we're just going to go over the main concepts and some applications of the AP Microeconomics course in 5 minutes. Please be advised that if you want something more in-depth and if you really want to learn something, please check out my other videos. A bit dry, but I rest assured they are not bad. So let's get this party started. In Unit 1, we introduced the very first economic model, and that is the production possibility frontier, which illustrates the trade-off an economy makes when producing two goods using a fixed amount of resources, usually capital or labor. And so this is important because it illustrates the concept of scarcity and opportunity cost. And anything on the line, the blue line, so A and B, is said to be attainable and efficient. So that is a combination of coconuts and fishes. C is attainable but inefficient. So think of resources idling, workers using the washroom for too long. And D is not feasible. It requires economic growth through productivity or more capital. However, we can get to D via trade, and that's if countries can specialize in production and produce a good and service that has the lowest opportunity cost, and they trade based on that. And when they trade based on that, they get to consume outside of their PPF. In Unit 2, we introduced the competitive market equilibrium, which is shown here, and that consists of the supply and demand curve. One thing I noticed is that students have a hard time differentiating between changes in quantity, demand and supply, versus changes in demand and supply. Both are very different. A change in quantity demanded, for example, is a result of any changes along of the price. So you move along the demand curve. A change in demand would be, for example, if incomes rise, well then the demand curve is going to shift to the right. So please review that. Also, know the difference or understand the simultaneous shifts of the supply and demand curve. For example, if demand and supply both increase, you're most likely going to think, oh, well, price and quantity increases. No, we know quantity increases, but price, we're not too sure. It really depends on the magnitude of the shift. So please review the 4 cases we have here. I will post the link to the PDF or this PowerPoint. And then when it comes to government price controls, there are 2 main ones. There's a price ceiling, which is set below the market price. This is the maximum price charge in the market, and it leads to a shortage. The price floor is the exact opposite. It's the minimum price charge in the market, and that is an example would be minimum wage. This leads to a surplus. We talked about, or we introduced the concept of elasticities, which is simply the sensitivity of the demand or supply to any changes to prices. For example, if we're considering an inelastic demand curve, which simply means that the demand curve itself, any changes in price will lead to very small changes in quantity demanded. So very inelastic. On the opposite end, elastic demand curve is simply, if I change prices a little bit, there'll be a huge change in quantity demanded. The same thing can be said for the supply curve. We also have unit elastic. So please review the 3 cases. And why it's important, because when it comes to taxes, right? So this is an illustration of a unit elastic, inelastic, and elastic. Also review the total revenue test. I don't have that much time now, but if you want me to go over it, please comment below and maybe I'll make a video. So why it's important, because the elasticity of the supply and demand curve when it comes to taxes imposed in that market will determine who bears the most the tax. For example, if so let's say there is an excise tax imposed on the supplier, which shifts the supply curve up by the amount of the tax. Who bears the burden of the tax? Well, it really depends on, again, the elasticities. For example, if the demand curve is more inelastic, right, insensitive, well, the burden of the tax will fall on the consumers because their consumption doesn't really change with respect to prices. So that's why taxing drugs and sin goods are typically very profitable. We also introduced the concept of surplus. So when the markets are at equilibrium at E, this maximizes the consumer surplus and producer surplus. If I don't want to go too much into it, but this is the concept of allocatively efficient markets. And what is a surplus? Well, that is the difference between what the consumers pay versus what they actually pay. A producer surplus is exactly that type of definition, except it's what the lowest that they're willing to sell it versus what they sell it at, and that's pretty much profit. We also introduced consumer choice and talked about utility. So if a consumer has an option between two goods and it wants to maximize his or her total utility, how do they do that with a fixed income? Well, we're going to use this utility maximizing rule, where we take the ratio of the margin utility of A over the price of A, we set that equal to the margin utility of B over the price of B. So here we have a typical example that you guys work through, usually on your AP test. And here we have the ratios already calculated for X and Y. We have an income of 16. And so we're going to use the exact rule, right? We're going to find that point. And that point is essentially 3X and 2Y. If you want me to go over this example, comment below and I'll make a video. 100p. Unit 3, we introduced the cost structures of a typical firm, and we went over the perfectly competitive goods markets and the respective firms in that perfect competition. And so what is a perfect competition? It's a type of market structure where there's many firms, they all sell homogeneous goods, they are price takers, they can't set the price above or below, and there's no profits in the long run. Also easy barriers to entry and exit. So again, the price takers, we have an example firm here, perfectly competitive firm, and they're making a profit. So the main points of interest is that here we have the average total cost curve, the marginal cost curve, which looks like a Nike sign because of specialization and diminishing returns to labor. And super important, where MR is equal to MC, that is the profit maximizing quantity, and that's, all firms abide by this. So where MR is equal to MC is right here. You're probably wondering, why is the demand curve horizontal? Well, because they're price takers. And so this also ends up becoming the margin of revenue curve. And they produce at E because MR is equal to MC, that's 5. And the difference between E and Z, that would be the per unit profit. Multiply it by 5, that gives you overall profit, right? Here we have a loss. So pretty much to quickly tell if you have a loss, usually the average total cost curve is above the marginal revenue curve. So I mentioned long run profit is equal to 0, right? How does that happen? Well, firms are going to enter that market because there's profit, so other firms, which drives supply to the right, increasing supply with a fixed demand curve. Well, prices are going to be lower, and it decreases so much that the marginal revenue curve, or the market price, will intersect essentially the minimum average total cost for all the firms in the industry, which is illustrated by point C, and thus we have 0 profit in the long run. What about if we have a loss in the short run? Well, you're inclined to think, okay, shut down now. Well, wrong. It really depends on where the market price is in relation to the minimum average variable cost curve. If it is greater or equal to the minimum average variable cost, then firms are going to produce in the short run and exit in the long run so that they can pay off some of their fixed costs. Again, a fixed cost is fixed in the short run. And if the market price is below the minimum, well, they're going to shut down now. Why? Because the market price, which is the marginal revenue that they receive, doesn't even cover the additional labor costs, let alone the fixed costs. So it makes sense for them to shut down immediately. Unit 4, imperfect competition, will start off with the monopoly. A monopoly is a single firm that provides a good and service to the whole market, no close substitute. So again, only firm, they are a price setter. They dictate whatever prices they want. And there's huge barriers to entry and exit. So just like with any firm, MR is equal to MC. They set their quantity there, charge a price up on the demand curve here. And if the average total cost is right over here, they earn a profit. They could obviously earn a loss too. In contrast to a PC market structure, this market structure produces lower quantity, charges a higher price. We get deadweight loss, which is this weird looking triangle that's kind of formed, and it's not allocatively nor productively efficient, which is another topic that I will cover in the future. Regulated monopoly or natural monopoly is a specific type of monopoly where it faces huge fixed costs, because usually running a monopoly in natural resources is very costly, such as electricity or hydro. And so when it comes to government regulation on prices, they have 2 points to consider: F and R. F is the fair return price, where this regulated natural monopoly is earning no profit. R is a socially optimal price, so this maximizes social welfare. However, at R, firms are going to lose money because average total cost is up here. So to achieve best of both worlds, governments would most likely set a price at F. Next up is oligopolies, and this is a market structure where there's very few firms, at least two to like six. You can think of in Canada, Rogers, TELUS, the telecommunications industry, and because each firm has a pretty significant portion of market share, whatever they do is going to affect other firms in terms of their profit. So this is the notion of interdependence. And so we actually use a subfield called game theory to analyze their behaviors. So again, game theory is the study of strategic decision making. The first example most people go through is the prisoner's dilemma. And essentially what ends up happening here is that you have two parties. They're like, oh man, we're going to rob a bank. They both agree to not snitch it. They get caught. They actually get caught, and they're separated, and they're given two choices: to confess or not confess. If they confess, they'll walk away with a lesser sentence. If they don't confess, well, they're going to get a higher sentence. So there's incentive to really cheat on their initial decision of not confessing. And so they do exactly that. They both confess, and they both get, let's say, 4 years in jail. However, they both know that if they don't confess, they get lesser amount of jail time. However, there's no way for them to communicate, and so they end up choosing the action that maximizes their essential, their return, I guess, on their decision, which is to confess. Last but not least is the monopolistically competitive market structure, very similar to PC and monopolies, like a combination, a weird baby between the two. However, it's more closely related to the perfectly competitive model. There's a lot of firms. One distinction is that they sell differentiated goods, huge amounts of advertising, and easy entry and exit. However, long-run profit is equal to zero. So yes, this firm is earning a profit, this firm is earning a loss, but if this firm is earning a profit in the short run, firms are going to enter just like in the PC market structure. And what ends up happening here is the demand will shift to the left, as well as the marginal revenue curve, up until we satisfy the assumption long-run profit is equal to zero. So that essentially occurs where the demand curve is tangent, so just touching the average total cost curve. Unit 4 is essentially the factors market. So everything we've been talking about, unit 1 to 4 is the goods market. Unit 5, I guess, yeah, unit 5 is factors market. And so we typically look at the labor market. And so when looking at the labor market, we switch the roles. The consumers are the suppliers of labor, and the businesses, the firms, they're the demanders of labor. So it'll look like this. And the first market structure is the perfectly competitive labor market. So very similar to perfectly competitive goods market. However, each firm is a wage taker. So whatever the market wage is, they take it. And so their supply curve, which is also the marginal factor cost curve, is perfectly elastic or horizontal. The demand curve is downward sloping. And we also said that the demand curve is also the marginal revenue product curve, right? And so firms are going to maximize, just like in the goods market where firms choose a production level where MR is equal to MC. The same thing or similar thing will be done in the labor market where firms are going to hire workers where the wage rate or MFC is equal to the marginal revenue product, which is right around here. So firms are going to hire here. The second market structure in the factor markets is the monopsony. I can never pronounce this. The monopsonistic labor market, very similar to a monopoly. And so they are the single firm that hires in this market. Just you can think of hospitals, and so they face their own supply curve, they face their own demand curve. However, right, if this monopsony wants to hire more workers, it has to charge a higher price to attract more workers. With that said, what about the current workers in that that's already hired? Well, that monopsony has to also increase their wages, so that's an additional cost. So when it comes to marginal factor cost, it's going to lie above the supply curve to account for that increasing in wages. And so firms are going to hire, or this firm is going to hire where MRP is equal to MFC, and they're going to charge a wage down on the supply curve and hire a QM units. So in contrast to PC labor markets, there's less workers being hired, and they're also charging a lower wage. So that is it in terms of Unit 4. We're not done there yet, guys. So for the AP test specifically, in a day from now, actually, or a day in some hours, we're not covering chapters or Unit 6, so that's why I didn't cover it in this video. I know I missed a lot of things. I went pretty fast. It's just a refresher. It's literally like, you're 5 minutes before doing your exam and you're just flipping your notes. This is that type of video, just a refresher. And if there's something specific you want me to cover, comment below, like and subscribe, and shoot me an email. And yeah, again, comment what unit you want me to cover more specifically. I have other videos. But yeah, thank you for your time, and have a wonderful day now.